For centuries, the story of Africa has been told through the lens of outsiders. But what if everything you thought you knew about African history was just the tip of the iceberg? In this groundbreaking documentary, we'll journey across 5,000 years and an entire continent to uncover the untold story of Africa's great kingdoms. We'll explore how these forgotten empires shaped world history, pioneered technological advancements, and built vast trade networks that connected continents. Get ready to see Africa and world history in a whole new light. Africa, the cradle of civilization. Africa, the cradle of humanity, holds the key to our origins as a species. The story of our ancestors begins millions of years ago in the vast landscapes of this ancient continent. Fossil evidence from renowned sites like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania and the Cradle of Humankind in South Africa paints a vivid picture of our early human relatives. Around 3.9 million years ago, we saw the emergence of Australopithecus, one of our earliest ancestors. These ancient hominids walked upright and had a mix of ape-like and human-like features. Their discovery revolutionized our understanding of human evolution and firmly established Africa as the birthplace of humanity. As time passed, our ancestors developed increasingly sophisticated tools. The Oldowan industry, dating back to about 2.6 million years ago, marks the beginning of stone tool technology. These simple tools, mainly sharp flakes and choppers, were crucial for survival. They allowed our ancestors to process food more efficiently and access new food sources. Fast forward to about 1.76 million years ago, and we see the emergence of the Acheulean industry. This more advanced tool-making technique produced symmetrical hand axes and cleavers. These tools were not just functional, but also showed early signs of aesthetic consideration, hinting at the cognitive capabilities of our ancestors. The use of fire was another game-changing innovation. Evidence suggests that controlled use of fire dates back to at least 1 million years ago in Africa. Fire provided warmth, protection from predators, and allowed for cooking, which made food easier to digest and potentially contributed to brain growth. As our ancestors evolved, they began to spread out from Africa. Around 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus became the first human species to leave the continent, venturing into Asia and Europe. But it wasn't until much later, roughly 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, that modern Homo sapiens began their global migration out of Africa. The African continent's diverse landscapes played a crucial role in shaping human evolution. From the savannas teeming with wildlife to the lush river valleys, these varied ecosystems provided the resources and challenges that drove adaptation and innovation. One of the most fascinating aspects of prehistoric African culture is the abundance of rock art. The Sahara Desert, now an arid expanse, was once home to thriving communities that left behind intricate paintings and engravings. These artworks, some dating back over 10,000 years, provide glimpses into the lives, beliefs, and cultural practices of our ancestors. In southern Africa, we find equally impressive rock art traditions. The Sand People, for instance, created vivid descriptions of their spiritual experiences and daily lives. These artworks are not just aesthetically pleasing, but also serve as valuable historical records, offering insights into past climates, wildlife, and human activities. Climate change has been a driving force in human evolution and migration throughout Africa's history. The Sahara, in particular, has undergone dramatic transformations. Between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, the region experienced a green Sahara period, with abundant rainfall creating lakes, rivers, and grasslands. This lush environment supported diverse wildlife and human populations. As the climate shifted and the Sahara began to dry up around 5,000 years ago, it forced populations to migrate. Some moved south into sub-Saharan Africa, while others congregated around the Nile Valley, setting the stage for the rise of ancient Egyptian civilization. The birth of civilization, ancient Egypt. As the climate shifted and populations migrated, the stage was set for something extraordinary along the banks of the Nile. Imagine a world where a single river held the key to unimaginable power, where gods walked among men, and where death was just the beginning. Welcome to the land of the pharaohs. The Nile River was more than just a waterway. It was the lifeblood of ancient Egyptian civilization. Its annual floods brought rich silt that fertilized the surrounding lands, creating an agricultural paradise in the midst of harsh desert terrain. This predictable cycle of flooding and receding waters allowed for bountiful harvests, supporting a growing population and fueling the rise of one of the most advanced and long-lasting civilizations in human history. Around 3100 BCE, a pivotal moment occurred that would shape the course of Egyptian history for millennia to come. King Narmer, also known as Menes, united Upper and Lower Egypt, creating a single, powerful state. This unification marked the beginning of the early dynastic period and set the foundation for the complex political and social structures that would define ancient Egypt. As the civilization flourished, its rulers began to leave their mark on the landscape in ways that continue to captivate us today. The Old Kingdom period, starting around 2686 BCE, saw the construction of the iconic pyramids at Giza. These massive structures were not just tombs for the pharaohs, but symbols of their divine power and the organizational capabilities of the Egyptian state. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, standing at 146 meters tall, remained the tallest human-made structure for over 3,800 years. At the heart of Egyptian society stood the pharaoh, a figure unlike any other ruler in the ancient world. Believed to be both human and divine, the pharaoh was responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the concept of cosmic order, truth, and justice. This dual role as political and religious leader gave the pharaoh unprecedented authority and shaped every aspect of Egyptian life. One of the most significant developments in Egyptian civilization was the invention of hieroglyphic writing. This complex system of pictorial symbols allowed for the recording of religious texts, historical events, and administrative documents. The ability to write and preserve information played a crucial role in the development of Egyptian bureaucracy, literature, and religious practices. Speaking of religion, the ancient Egyptians had a rich and complex belief system that permeated every aspect of their lives. They worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, each associated with different aspects of the natural world and human experience. The afterlife held particular importance, with elaborate burial practices and mummification techniques developed to ensure the deceased's journey to the next world. Egyptian society was highly stratified, with a complex hierarchy that reflected the perceived divine order. At the top stood the pharaoh and the royal family, followed by powerful nobles and priests. Below them were scribes, artisans, and merchants, while farmers and laborers formed the base of the social pyramid. Despite this rigid structure, there were opportunities for social mobility, particularly through education and service to the state. Egypt and Kush, allies, rivals, and conquerors. As Egyptian society flourished along the Nile, another powerful civilization was taking shape to the south. The Kingdom of Kush, nestled in the region known as Nubia, shared a deep connection with Egypt through their mutual reliance on the life-giving waters of the Nile. This relationship between the two civilizations would evolve over centuries, shifting from allies to rivals and eventually to conquerors. The story of Egypt and Kush is one of cultural exchange and economic ties. Trade routes crisscrossed the desert, connecting the two lands and facilitating the exchange of valuable goods. Gold, ivory, and exotic animals flowed northward from Kush, while Egyptian crafts and luxury items made their way south. This bustling trade network not only enriched both civilizations, but also allowed for the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. During the Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom periods, the relationship between Egypt and Kush became more complex. Egyptian pharaohs, eager to secure valuable resources and expand their territory, launched military campaigns into Nubia. These expeditions aimed to establish control over the region's gold mines and trade routes. The Egyptians built a series of fortresses along the Nile to protect their interests and maintain their dominance over Kush. Despite periods of Egyptian control, the Kingdom of Kush continued to grow in power and influence. The city of Kerma emerged as a thriving capital, showcasing the unique cultural identity of the Kushites. Kerma's rulers constructed massive mud brick temples and elaborate burial structures, demonstrating their wealth and sophisticated architectural techniques. The Kushite civilization developed its own distinct artistic styles, blending influences from Egypt with local traditions. As Egypt entered a period of decline during the Third Intermediate Period, Kush saw an opportunity to assert its power. In a dramatic reversal of fortunes, Kushite rulers launched a northward expansion, eventually conquering Egypt and establishing the 25th dynasty. Kushite pharaohs like Piye and Taharka ruled over a vast empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa. These Nubian pharaohs embraced Egyptian traditions, presenting themselves as the rightful heirs to the legacy of the great Egyptian kings. The Kushite pharaohs of the 25th dynasty sought to revitalize Egyptian culture and religion. They restored ancient temples, promoted traditional religious practices, and even attempted to revive the pyramid-building tradition that had long been abandoned in Egypt. This period saw a fascinating blend of Kushite and Egyptian elements in art, architecture, and religious iconography. However, the Kushite rule over Egypt was relatively short-lived. The powerful Assyrian Empire, expanding from Mesopotamia, invaded Egypt and forced the Kushite pharaohs to retreat southward. This marked the end of Kush's direct control over Egypt, but it did not spell the end of the Kushite civilization itself. Following their retreat from Egypt, the Kushites established a new capital at Meroe. This city, located further south along the Nile, became a center of innovation and cultural development. Meroe was renowned for its advanced ironworking techniques, producing high-quality metal goods that were prized throughout the region. The city's distinctive architecture, including steep-sided pyramids and elaborately decorated temples, reflected a unique Kushite style that had evolved from earlier Egyptian influences. Aksum, a Christian power. As the kingdom of Kush began to decline, a new power was rising in the Horn of Africa. Around 100 CE, the kingdom of Aksum emerged as a dominant force, strategically positioned at the crossroads of trade routes connecting Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. This location allowed Aksum to become a major player in the world's economy, controlling the flow of goods between these diverse regions. One of the most significant events in Aksumite history occurred in the 4th century CE, when King Ezana converted to Christianity. This decision had far-reaching consequences, as Christianity soon became the state religion of Aksum. The kingdom was one of the first in the world to adopt Christianity as its official faith, predating many European nations. This religious shift influenced Aksumite culture, art, and architecture for centuries to come. The Aksumites left behind a rich legacy of inscriptions that provide invaluable insights into their society and achievements. Many of these inscriptions were written in Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopic language that is still used in Ethiopian Orthodox Christian liturgy today. These inscriptions record royal victories, religious decrees, and the day-to-day affairs of the kingdom, offering a window into the lives of the Aksumite people. When it comes to architectural achievements, Aksum is perhaps best known for its iconic stelae. These massive stone obelisks, some standing over 30 meters tall, were erected as monuments to Aksumite rulers. The largest of these, the Great Stele, is believed to have fallen and broken during construction, but it would have stood at an impressive 33 meters if completed. These stelae demonstrate the advanced engineering and stoneworking skills of the Aksumites. Following the adoption of Christianity, Aksum began constructing early Christian churches that would go on to influence regional art and architecture for centuries. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, said to house the Ark of the Covenant, remains one of the holiest sites in Ethiopian Christianity to this day. Aksum's influence extended far beyond its borders. The kingdom maintained diplomatic and trade relations with the Roman and Byzantine empires, exchanging ambassadors and luxury goods. These connections helped solidify Aksum's status as a major player on the world stage. However, not all of Aksum's interactions with its neighbors were peaceful. The kingdom engaged in conflicts with the Himyarite kingdom in Arabia, eventually conquering and controlling much of southern Arabia for a time. Despite its power and influence, Aksum began to decline around the 7th century CE. Several factors contributed to this downfall. Environmental changes, including deforestation and soil erosion, may have reduced agricultural productivity. Shifting trade routes, particularly with the rise of Islamic powers controlling Red Sea trade, diminished Aksum's economic importance. Additionally, competition with the expanding Islamic caliphates put pressure on the kingdom from multiple directions. The Ghana Empire, Gold and Glory. As the kingdom of Aksum began to decline, a new power was emerging in West Africa. Around 300 CE, the Ghana Empire started to take shape in the region between the Sahara Desert and the Sahel. This empire, one of the earliest and most influential states in West Africa, would go on to dominate the region for nearly 1,000 years. The Ghana Empire's success was largely due to its strategic location. Situated at the crossroads of major trade routes, it became a hub for trans-Saharan trade. Merchants from North Africa and the Mediterranean would travel across the harsh desert to exchange their goods with the people of Ghana. The empire's position allowed it to control the flow of two of the most valuable commodities of the time, gold from the south and salt from the north. The Soninke people, who established the Ghana Empire, were masterful innovators in governance, agriculture, and trade. They developed a centralized system of government that allowed them to effectively manage their vast territory. The Soninke also introduced new agricultural techniques that helped them thrive in the challenging environment of the Sahel. At the heart of Ghana's economy was its control over the gold mines in the region. The empire didn't directly own these mines, but it exercised strict control over the gold trade. Every nugget of gold that was mined had to pass through the empire's capital, where it was taxed. This system of taxation made the Ghana Empire incredibly wealthy. The ruler of the empire, known as the Ghana, held both political and religious power. This dual role allowed Ghana to maintain stability and centralized power within the empire. Ghana was believed to have divine status, which further solidified their authority over the people. As trade with North Africa increased, Islam began to influence the culture of the Ghana Empire. Muslim, Berber, and Arab traders brought not only their goods, but also their religion and customs. While the ruling class of Ghana remained committed to traditional African beliefs, they allowed Islam to flourish in the trading cities. This religious tolerance contributed to the empire's success as a trading hub. The Ghana Empire's military strength was another key factor in its dominance. The empire's warriors were equipped with iron weapons, which gave them a significant advantage over their neighbors. This military might allowed Ghana to secure its trade routes and protect its wealth from potential invaders. Despite its power and wealth, the Ghana Empire began to decline around the 11th century. Several factors contributed to this downfall. The empire had expanded too far, making it difficult to maintain control over its vast territory. Environmental pressures, including prolonged droughts, put strain on the empire's agricultural base. Competition from rising powers, like the Almoravids, a Berber dynasty from North Africa, and the emerging Mali Empire also weakened Ghana's position. The Mali Empire, from Sundiata to Mansa Musa. The Mali Empire, founded by Sundiata Keita in 1235 CE, would become one of the largest and wealthiest empires in African history. Sundiata's victory at the Battle of Karina marked the beginning of an era that would see West Africa rise to global prominence. Sundiata, known as the Lion King, united the Mandinka people and established a centralized administration that laid the foundation for Mali's prosperity. He implemented a system of governance that balanced traditional customs with new innovations, creating a stable and efficient empire. Sundiata's leadership set the stage for Mali's rapid expansion and economic growth. The Mali Empire's wealth came primarily from its control of gold mines, salt trade routes, and agricultural production. Gold from the southern regions of the empire flowed northward, while salt from the Sahara made its way south. This control over key resources made Mali a hub of commerce in West Africa. The empire's strategic location allowed it to dominate trade networks that stretched across the Sahara, connecting West Africa with North Africa and the Mediterranean world. Two cities in particular became the beating heart of Mali's intellectual and economic life: Timbuktu and Djenné. These urban centers attracted merchants and scholars from across the Islamic world, transforming Mali into a crossroads of ideas and commerce. Timbuktu, with its famous mosques and libraries, became synonymous with learning and scholarship. The city's reputation as a center of Islamic education drew students and scholars from as far away as the Middle East and North Africa. The reign of Mansa Musa, who ruled from 1312 to 1337 CE, is often considered the golden age of the Mali Empire. Mansa Musa's famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 CE showcased Mali's immense wealth to the world. The king's procession included thousands of servants and slaves, each carrying gold bars. Mansa Musa's generosity during his journey was so extravagant that it reportedly caused inflation in the cities he visited, affecting economies as far away as Egypt. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage had far-reaching consequences beyond simply displaying Mali's wealth. It strengthened ties with the Islamic world and brought back valuable knowledge and expertise to West Africa. The king returned with architects and scholars who would help transform Mali's cities and intellectual landscape. Under Mansa Musa's patronage, Mali experienced a cultural renaissance. The construction of mosques, madrasas, and libraries flourished, solidifying Mali's reputation as a center of learning. The famous Jingwerebere Mosque in Timbuktu, built during Mansa Musa's reign, stands as a testament to this period of cultural and architectural advancement. These institutions preserved and produced countless manuscripts covering subjects from astronomy and mathematics to poetry and jurisprudence. Mali's influence extended far beyond its borders. The empire interacted with neighboring states and distant empires, playing a crucial role in connecting West Africa to global trade networks. Diplomatic and commercial ties stretched from the Atlantic coast to the Mediterranean and beyond. Mali's gold found its way to Europe, the Middle East, and even as far as China, while exotic goods and new ideas flowed back into the empire. Mali and Songhai, a clash of empires. The 15th century ushered in a period of dramatic change in West Africa, as the once mighty Mali Empire began to show signs of decline. Internal strife and external pressures were eroding the foundations of Mali's power, creating an opportunity for a new empire to emerge. As Mali's grip loosened, a new player entered the stage, the Songhai Empire. Based in the city of Gao, Songhai had long existed in Mali's shadow. But under the leadership of Sunni Ali, who came to power in 1464, Songhai began to flex its muscles. Sunni Ali was a brilliant military strategist who recognized the opportunity presented by Mali's weakening position. Sunni Ali embarked on a series of military campaigns that would transform Songhai from a minor kingdom into a major empire. He set his sights on the wealthy cities of Timbuktu and Jenne, which had been jewels in Mali's crown. These cities were not just symbols of prestige, they were crucial control points for the trans-Saharan trade routes that had made Mali so wealthy. The conflict between Mali and Songhai wasn't just a simple military confrontation. It was a complex struggle for control over the lifeblood of West African civilization: trade. Gold from the south and salt from the north had long flowed through this region, enriching empires and fostering the growth of great cities. Now, as Mali and Songhai vied for supremacy, control over these trade routes became the key to power. The battle for Timbuktu and Jenne was particularly significant. These cities were not just commercial centers, they were also bastions of Islamic learning and culture. Scholars and students from across the Muslim world gathered in their famous mosques and universities. As the conflict between Mali and Songhai intensified, the fate of this intellectual tradition hung in the balance. Sunni Ali's conquest of Timbuktu in 1468 marked a turning point in the struggle. The city, which had long been associated with Mali's greatness, now fell under Songhai control. This victory was not just a military triumph, it was a symbolic changing of the guard in West African politics. But the transition of power was not smooth or immediate. Mali, though weakened, was not yet defeated. The empire's rulers fought desperately to maintain their position, launching counterattacks and attempting to rally their remaining allies. For a time, West Africa was caught in a tug-of-war between these two great powers. The conflict between Mali and Songhai had far-reaching consequences beyond the battlefield. As power shifted, so too did patterns of trade and cultural exchange. Merchants and scholars had to navigate a changing political landscape, forging new alliances and adapting to new rulers. The spread of Islam, which had accelerated under Mali's patronage, continued under Songhai rule, but with new dynamics and influences. As the 15th century progressed, it became increasingly clear that Songhai was ascendant. Under Sunni Ali's successors, particularly Askia Muhammad I, the empire continued to expand and consolidate its power. Mali's influence, meanwhile, continued to wane. The once great empire was reduced to a shadow of its former self, its territories shrinking and its power diminishing. The Songhai Empire, Betrayals and Battles. Under Sunni Ali's rule, Songhai became the dominant force in West Africa, controlling the lucrative trans-Saharan trade routes. This control allowed the empire to amass incredible wealth through the taxation of goods passing through its territories. The flow of gold, salt, and other valuable commodities fueled Songhai's growth and prosperity. Sunni Ali's legacy was complex. While he was a Muslim, he maintained many traditional African religious practices, which sometimes put him at odds with Islamic scholars. Despite this tension, his military prowess and administrative skills laid the foundation for Songhai's golden age. After Sunni Ali's death in 1492, his son briefly succeeded him, but was quickly overthrown by one of Sunni Ali's generals, Askia Muhammad I. Askia Muhammad's reign marked a significant shift in Songhai's governance and culture. He implemented wide-ranging administrative and religious reforms that would shape the empire for generations to come. Askia Muhammad worked to centralize the empire's governance, dividing it into provinces and appointing loyal governors. He also standardized weights, measures, and currency, which greatly facilitated trade throughout the empire. But perhaps his most lasting impact was in the realm of education and scholarship. Askia Muhammad was a devout Muslim and sought to make Songhai a center of Islamic learning. He encouraged scholars to settle in Timbuktu and other cities, establishing libraries and schools. This patronage of education transformed Timbuktu into one of the world's great intellectual centers, with scholars coming from as far away as the Middle East to study and teach. The Songhai Empire reached its zenith under Askia Muhammad's rule, stretching from the Atlantic coast to the Hausa lands in the east, and from the Sahara in the north to the forests of West Africa in the south. This vast territory encompassed diverse peoples and cultures, all connected by Songhai's extensive trade networks. However, the seeds of Songhai's decline were sown even at the height of its power. The empire's vast size made it difficult to govern effectively, and the succession crisis began to weaken its political cohesion in the late 16th century. These internal struggles left Songhai vulnerable to external threats. The final blow to Songhai's dominance came in 1591, when the Moroccan Sultan Ahmed al-Mansur sent an army led by Judar Pasha across the Sahara. Armed with firearms, a technology that Songhai's forces lacked, the Moroccan army defeated Songhai at the Battle of Tondibi. This defeat marked the end of Songhai as a unified empire, though remnants of its power structure persisted for some time. The Kano Chronicles: Rise of the Hausa City-States. As the Songhai Empire's influence waned, a network of thriving city-states was quietly building its own legacy in what is now northern Nigeria. These were the Hausa city-states, with Kano emerging as one of the most prominent centers. The story of Kano and its sister cities is preserved in a remarkable document known as the Kano Chronicles, a historical record that provides valuable insights into Hausa history and development. The Hausa city-states began to take shape around 999 CE, built on a foundation of agriculture and commerce. Farmers cultivated crops like millet, sorghum, and cotton, while artisans produced high-quality textiles and leather goods. The Hausa people were skilled traders, dealing in commodities such as salt, kola nuts, and the vibrant indigo-dyed cloths that would become famous across Africa. Kano's rise to prominence was largely due to its strategic location. Situated at the crossroads of important trans-Saharan trade routes, Kano became a major hub connecting West Africa to North Africa and beyond. Merchants from far and wide converged on Kano's bustling markets, exchanging goods and ideas. This constant flow of people and products not only brought wealth to the city, but also exposed it to new cultural influences. One of the most significant influences to shape Hausa culture and governance was Islam. Introduced through trade with North African merchants, Islam gradually integrated with local traditions. The process wasn't always smooth, but over time, Islamic principles became an integral part of Hausa society. Mosques and Islamic schools sprang up alongside traditional institutions, creating a unique blend of African and Islamic cultures. The political structure of Kano and other Hausa states was centered around the Sarakuna, or kings. These rulers held significant power, but they didn't govern alone. Councils of advisors, often including religious leaders and representatives from important families, helped shape policy and make decisions. This system of checks and balances helped maintain stability and allowed for a degree of popular input into governance. Relations among the Hausa states were complex, characterized by both cooperation and competition. While they shared a common language and many cultural traditions, each city-state maintained its independence. They formed alliances, engaged in trade, and sometimes went to war with one another. The Hausa states also interacted with larger empires in the region, such as Mali, Songhai, and Kanem-Bornu, sometimes as trading partners and other times as rivals or subjects. One of Kano's most famous features was its renowned dye pits. These deep wells, filled with a mixture of water and indigo, produced textiles of unparalleled vibrancy. Kano's dyers were true artisans, carefully guarding the secrets of their craft. The indigo-dyed cloths they produced were prized across Africa and even made their way to distant markets in Europe and the Middle East. The city's commercial success attracted people from all over West Africa and beyond. Kano became a melting pot of cultures, with Arab and Berber merchants rubbing shoulders with Hausa traders and artisans from neighboring lands. This diversity contributed to Kano's reputation as a center of learning and culture. Great Zimbabwe, City of Stone. In the heart of southern Africa stood a city unlike any other on the continent. Great Zimbabwe, a marvel of ancient engineering, rose from the plains between 1100 and 1450 CE. This wasn't just any city. It was a sprawling complex of stone structures built without mortar, a testament to the ingenuity of its creators. Great Zimbabwe's location was no accident. It sat near important trade routes that connected the gold-rich interior of Africa with the bustling ports of the Indian Ocean coast. This strategic position allowed the kingdom to control the flow of valuable goods like gold, ivory, and exotic animal skins. Traders from far and wide would converge on Great Zimbabwe, bringing with them not just goods, but also ideas and cultural influences. The most impressive feature of Great Zimbabwe was its massive stone structures. The Great Enclosure, a circular wall up to 36 feet high and 820 feet in circumference, still stands today as a silent witness to the city's former grandeur. Built entirely of granite blocks cut to fit perfectly without mortar, it's a feat that would challenge even modern engineers. Inside the enclosure, intricate passageways and towers create a maze-like structure that continues to baffle archaeologists. But Great Zimbabwe wasn't just about impressive architecture. It was the heart of a complex society with a clear hierarchy. At the top sat the ruling elite, who lived in the stone enclosures and controlled access to the most valuable resources. They oversaw the mining of gold in nearby regions and regulated trade, amassing great wealth in the process. The common people lived in more modest dwellings outside the stone structures, but they too played crucial roles in the kingdom's economy as farmers, craftsmen, and traders. One of the most intriguing aspects of Great Zimbabwe is its spiritual significance. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous artifacts that hint at a rich religious life. Among the most famous are the Zimbabwe birds, soapstone carvings of birds perched on pedestals. These unique sculptures are believed to have held great spiritual or political importance, perhaps serving as symbols of royal power or as connections to the ancestral world. Great Zimbabwe didn't exist in isolation. It was part of a vast trade network that stretched across the Indian Ocean. goods from Great Zimbabwe would make their way to the Swahili coast, where they were traded for exotic items from as far away as China and India. Fragments of Chinese porcelain and Arab glass beads found at the site are silent testimonies to these far-reaching connections. But, like all great civilizations, Great Zimbabwe eventually declined. Around the mid-15th century, the city began to lose its prominence. The reasons for this are still debated by historians. Some point to environmental factors. The land around the city may have become depleted after centuries of intensive farming and grazing. Others suggest that shifts in trade routes or the exhaustion of gold mines might have played a role. Whatever the cause, the population of Great Zimbabwe declined, and power shifted to other centers in the region. The Swahili Coast and Great Zimbabwe, a trading network. The Swahili Coast, stretching from modern-day Somalia to Mozambique, became a vibrant network of city-states that would shape global trade long before European explorers set foot on African soil. These coastal kingdoms redefined what it meant to be African. Cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar became the backdrop of one of history's greatest cultural fusions. Here, African gold met Chinese porcelain, and a new language was born from the marriage of continents. The Swahili coast was more than just a string of cities. It was a melting pot where African, Arab, and Persian influences blended to create a unique society. Islam took root, becoming the dominant religion, while the Swahili language emerged as the lingua franca, facilitating trade and cultural exchange across vast distances. The architecture of the Swahili coast tells a story of cultural synthesis. Coral stone buildings, with their intricate carvings and sturdy construction, stood as testaments to the wealth and sophistication of these maritime societies. The Great Mosque at Kilwa, with its domed roof and columned prayer hall, exemplified the fusion of African and Islamic architectural traditions. But what made the Swahili coast truly exceptional was its role in the Indian Ocean trade network. Swahili merchants were masters of the sea, utilizing advanced maritime technologies and navigational knowledge to participate in the monsoon-driven trade system. They understood the rhythms of the ocean, timing their voyages to coincide with favorable winds that would carry them to distant shores and back again. The prosperity of the Swahili coast was intimately tied to its connection with the interior of Africa, particularly Great Zimbabwe. While the coastal cities provided the gateway to the wider world, it was the gold and ivory from Great Zimbabwe that fueled much of this trade. Swahili merchants acted as middlemen, facilitating the exchange of African goods for exotic items from Arabia, India, and China. This economic relationship created a symbiosis between the coast and the interior. Great Zimbabwe's wealth allowed it to import luxury goods through the Swahili ports, while the coastal cities relied on the steady supply of gold and ivory to maintain their position in the Indian Ocean trade network. It was a partnership that brought prosperity to both regions for centuries. The social structure of the Swahili city-states reflected their mercantile nature. At the top were the ruling elites, often claiming descent from both African and Arab lineages. These wealthy merchants and leaders lived in stone houses and controlled the flow of trade. Below them were the artisans, craftsmen, and smaller traders who kept the economic engine of the cities running. At the bottom were the laborers and slaves, many of whom were brought from the interior to work in the bustling ports. The Swahili coast's influence extended far beyond Africa. Chinese porcelain found in the ruins of Swahili cities attests to the reach of their trade networks. Coins minted in Kilwa have been discovered as far away as Australia, suggesting that Swahili traders may have ventured much further than previously thought. The Kingdom of Congo, Afonso I's struggle. The Kingdom of Congo emerged around 1390 CE, establishing its capital at Mbanza, Congo. This centralized state would soon face a challenge that would test its very foundations and alter the course of African history. The arrival of Portuguese explorers in the late 15th century marked the beginning of a new era for Congo. These European visitors brought with them not only trade goods, but also a religion that would profoundly influence the kingdom's future. Christianity quickly gained a foothold in Congo, setting the stage for a complex cultural exchange that would shape the region for centuries to come. It was during the reign of King Afonso I, who ruled from 1506 to 1543, that Congo's engagement with European influences reached new heights. Afonso, born Mvemba Nzinga, replaced Christianity with fervor. He not only converted to the new faith, but also established Catholicism as the state religion of Congo. This decision would have far-reaching consequences for the kingdom's governance and culture. Afonso's reign was marked by ambitious efforts to integrate European influences into Congo society. He encouraged the development of a literate class, sending young Congolese nobles to study in Portugal and establishing schools within the kingdom. The king even adopted Portuguese titles and courtly customs, creating a unique blend of African and European traditions at the royal court. However, Afonso's relationship with the Portuguese was far from simple. While he sought to harness European knowledge and technology to strengthen his kingdom, he also faced challenges from Portuguese traders and missionaries. The slave trade, in particular, became a source of tension. Afonso found himself caught between the economic benefits of the trade and the devastating impact it had on his people. In a series of letters to the Portuguese monarchy, Afonso laid bare his concerns. He wrote passionately about the abuses committed by Portuguese merchants, who often kidnapped free Congolese citizens to sell into slavery. In one letter, he lamented, "Each day the traders are kidnapping our people, children of this country, sons of our nobles and vassals, even people of our own family." These correspondences provided a poignant glimpse into Afonso's struggle to maintain Congo's sovereignty in the face of growing European influence. Despite these challenges, Congo's economy flourished during this period. The kingdom became a major exporter of ivory, textiles, and, unfortunately, enslaved individuals. Congo's strategic location allowed it to play a significant role in the burgeoning transatlantic slave trade, a position that brought both wealth and moral dilemmas to the kingdom's rulers. Afonso's reign represented a high point in Congo's power and influences, but the challenges he faced would only intensify in the years following his death. Succession crises and internal divisions began to weaken the kingdom's political structure. European powers, sensing opportunity, increased their interference in Congo's affairs. Yet the story of Congo is not simply one of decline in the face of European expansion. The kingdom's people showed remarkable resilience and adaptability. Periods of rebellion against colonial powers punctuated the following centuries, with Congo's leaders repeatedly attempting to reassert their independence and restore the kingdom's former glory. The Luba Empire. Warrior myths. Deep in the heart of Central Africa, a powerful kingdom emerged that would challenge our understanding of traditional African governance. The Luba Empire, established around 1585 CE near the Congo River basin, was a realm where myth and reality intertwined to create one of Africa's most fascinating systems of rule. At the core of Luba culture was the legend of Kalala Ilunga, a hero whose exploits were whispered around firesides for generations. The story goes that Kalala Ilunga, blessed with the ability to make rain fall from a clear sky, overthrew a cruel ruler and established a new dynasty. This foundational myth wasn't just a tale to entertain. It embodied the values of bravery, leadership, and divine authority that the Luba held dear. The political structure of the Luba Empire was a masterpiece of organization. At its head was the Mulopwe, or Sacred King, believed to possess supernatural powers. But the real genius of the Luba system lay in its ability to integrate local chiefs, known as Balopwe, into a unified yet decentralized governance structure. This allowed the empire to expand while maintaining stability, as conquered territories could keep their local leaders under the umbrella of Luba authority. The Luba economy thrived on a combination of agriculture, fishing, and trade. Farmers cultivated crops suited to the diverse landscapes of the empire, while fishermen plied the rivers and lakes. But it was trade that truly set the Luba apart. They became key players in regional and long-distance trade networks, dealing in valuable commodities like salt, iron, and ivory. These trade connections not only brought wealth, but also new ideas and technologies to the empire. Art and oral tradition played crucial roles in Luba society. Skilled artisans crafted ceremonial masks and royal regalia that were more than just beautiful objects. They were imbued with deep symbolic meaning. These artifacts served to reinforce the power and legitimacy of the monarchy. Meanwhile, oral historians kept the empire's past alive, reciting genealogies and important events that stretched back generations. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of Luba culture was the Bambudye Association. This secret society acted as the custodians of Luba history and political wisdom. Members of the Bombudye used memory devices like beaded necklaces and Lukasa memory boards to preserve and transmit complex historical and cultural information. Their role in maintaining continuity and stability in the empire cannot be overstated. Despite its sophisticated political and cultural systems, the Luba Empire faced its share of challenges. Rivalries with neighboring states led to frequent conflicts, testing the empire's military might. Internal disputes, often centered around succession issues, occasionally threatened the stability of the realm. The impact of the transatlantic and Indian Ocean slave trades also began to be felt, as the demand for enslaved individuals disrupted traditional social structures and economic systems. The Mutapa Empire, resistance and trade. As the sun set on the great civilization of Great Zimbabwe, a new power was rising in the Zambezi River Valley. Around 1450 CE, the Mutapa Empire emerged as a formidable successor state, inheriting the legacy of its predecessor and forging its own path in history. This empire, centered in what is now modern-day Zimbabwe and Mozambique, would become a key player in the region's political and economic landscape for nearly 2 centuries. The Mutapa Empire quickly established control over crucial trade routes that connected the interior of southern Africa to the Swahili coast. Gold was the empire's most prized commodity, and the Mutapa rulers leveraged their vast mineral wealth to build connections with Swahili coastal traders and tap into the broader Indian Ocean trade network. This strategic position allowed the empire to prosper and expand its influence across the region. At the heart of the Mutapa Empire's political structure was the Mwene Mutapa, or king. This powerful ruler governed the empire and played a crucial role in maintaining trade relations with neighboring states and distant partners. The Mwene Mutapa's authority extended far beyond the capital, with a network of subordinate chiefs helping to administer the vast territory under Mutapa control. The Mutapa Empire didn't simply inherit Great Zimbabwe's wealth and trade connections. It also carried forward important cultural and architectural traditions. The practice of building impressive stone structures continued, with the Mutapa rulers constructing their own monumental edifices as symbols of power and prestige. These stone-built complexes served as centers of administration and showcased the empire's wealth and architectural prowess. As the 16th century dawned, a new chapter in the Mutapa Empire's history began with the arrival of Portuguese traders and missionaries. These European newcomers were drawn by tales of the empire's vast gold reserves and saw an opportunity to establish a foothold in the lucrative Indian Ocean trade network. The Portuguese presence marked the beginning of European influence in the region and set the stage for future attempts to dominate the empire's trade networks. The Mutapa rulers, however, were not content to simply acquiesce to Portuguese demands. They mounted significant resistance efforts to protect their sovereignty and maintain control over their trade networks. This resistance took various forms, from diplomatic maneuvering to outright military conflict. The Mwene Mutapa often formed strategic alliances with neighboring states to counter Portuguese encroachment, demonstrating the empire's political savvy in the face of a new and formidable threat. Ndongo and Mutapa, Queen Nzinga's resistance. As the Mutapa Empire grappled with Portuguese encroachment, another African kingdom was about to challenge European colonial ambitions head-on. In the 17th century, the kingdoms of Ndongo and Mutapa, located in present-day Angola, emerged as powerful centers of resistance against Portuguese expansion. At the heart of this resistance stood Queen Nzinga, a figure whose diplomatic prowess and military acumen would shape the course of Central African history. The Portuguese had long set their sights on the fertile lands of Central Africa, driven by their insatiable appetite for slaves and natural resources. They saw the kingdoms of Ndongo and Mutapa as obstacles to their colonial ambitions, and they were determined to bring these proud African nations to heel. But they hadn't counted on the fierce determination and cunning of Queen Nzinga. Born into Ndongo's royal family, Nzinga's path to power was anything but straightforward. She ascended to the throne of Ndongo in 1624, at a time when Portuguese incursions had already destabilized the region. The new queen faced a daunting task: to preserve her people's independence in the face of an increasingly aggressive colonial power. Nzinga's first major confrontation with the Portuguese came during the Peace Conference of 1622. The Portuguese, expecting to intimidate the African delegation, were taken aback by Nzinga's bold tactics. When she arrived at the meeting, she found that the Portuguese governor had provided her with no chair, expecting her to sit on the floor in a position of subservience. Nzinga, however, was not one to be humbled. She ordered one of her attendants to serve as a human chair, sitting on his back throughout the negotiations. This act of defiance sent a clear message: Nzinga would not bow to Portuguese authority. The Queen's diplomatic skills were matched only by her military strategy. Recognizing that Ndongo alone could not withstand the Portuguese onslaught, Nzinga set about building a network of alliances. She reached out to neighboring African states, convincing them that unity was their only hope against the European invaders. But perhaps her most ingenious move was her alliance with the Quilombo communities. The Quilombo were groups of runaway slaves who had established their own settlements in the interior. Nzinga saw in these communities not just potential allies, but a powerful symbol of resistance against Portuguese oppression. She welcomed the Quilombo into her forces, integrating their guerrilla tactics into her broader military strategy. This alliance not only strengthened Nzinga's army, but also struck fear into the hearts of the Portuguese, who saw their own slaves turning against them. Nzinga's military campaigns were characterized by their adaptability and resourcefulness. She understood that she couldn't match the Portuguese in terms of firepower, so she relied on guerrilla tactics, using the landscape to her advantage. Her forces would strike quickly and then melt away into the dense forests, frustrating Portuguese attempts to engage in traditional warfare. As the conflict wore on, Nzinga was forced to abandon Ndongo. But rather than surrender, she established a new base of operations in the neighboring kingdom of Mutapa. Under her rule, Mutapa was transformed from a minor state into a powerful and stable kingdom. It became a refuge for those fleeing Portuguese oppression and a symbol of African resistance to colonial rule. Nzinga's reign lasted for nearly 4 decades, during which she consistently outmaneuvered and outfought the Portuguese. Her resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds inspired generations of Africans to resist colonial rule. Even after her death in 1663 at the age of 81, her legacy lived on. The Zulu Kingdom, Shaka's Revolution. In the early 19th century, the South African region was a patchwork of small clans and chiefdoms, each vying for control over limited resources and territory. It was in this fragmented political landscape that a young man named Shaka would rise to power and transform the Zulu people into one of the most formidable military powers the continent had ever seen. Shaka's story began with humble origins. Born around 1787 as the illegitimate son of a Zulu chief, he spent his early years in exile with his mother. But Shaka's military prowess and strategic mind would soon catapult him to the forefront of Zulu society. When he became chief of the Zulu in 1816, he set about revolutionizing warfare in ways that would change the face of Southern Africa forever. One of Shaka's most significant innovations was the introduction of the ikulwa, a short stabbing spear that replaced the traditional throwing spear. This weapon allowed for close combat tactics that proved devastatingly effective against enemy forces. Shaka also developed new battle formations, including the famous Horns of the Buffalo strategy. This involved a central force, the chest, that engaged the enemy head-on, while 2 wings, the horns, would sweep around to encircle and trap the opposing army. But Shaka's genius extended beyond mere military tactics. He understood that to create a truly powerful kingdom, he needed to unify the various clans under a single banner. As he conquered neighboring groups, Shaka didn't simply subjugate them. Instead, he integrated them into the Zulu kingdom, fostering a sense of shared identity and loyalty to the central authority. This process of centralization and unification brought about significant changes in Zulu society. Shaka restructured the age-set system, which traditionally organized men into groups based on their age to better support his military ambitions. Young men were now expected to serve as warriors for a set period before they could marry and start families. This not only provided a constant supply of soldiers, but also reinforced the idea that service to the kingdom was a fundamental part of Zulu identity. The rapid expansion of the Zulu kingdom under Shaka's rule had far-reaching consequences across southern Africa. The period known as the Mfekene, or the Crushing, saw massive population movements as people fled from Shaka's armies or were displaced by other groups trying to escape his reach. This chain reaction of migration and conflict reshaped the demographic and political landscape of the entire region. As the Zulu kingdom grew in power and influence, it began to attract the attention of European traders and explorers. Shaka was initially cautious in his dealings with these newcomers, but he also saw potential benefits in trading with them. He allowed limited European presence in his territories, carefully controlling their access and activities to maintain Zulu sovereignty. However, Shaka's reign was not without its challenges. As the kingdom expanded, internal tensions began to simmer. The constant state of warfare and the harsh discipline Shaka imposed on his people began to take its toll. Some of his policies, such as a period of extended mourning following his mother's death in 1827, were deeply unpopular and strained the loyalty of his subjects. The Zulu versus the British, the Battle of Isandlwana. In the late 19th century, southern Africa was a region in flux. The Zulu kingdom, still powerful but no longer at its peak, found itself in the crosshairs of British colonial expansion. King Cetshwayo, a descendant of the great Shaka, ruled over a nation that had known both the glory of conquest and the challenges of maintaining its independence. Cetshwayo was no stranger to diplomacy. He understood the precarious position of his kingdom and sought to navigate the treacherous waters of colonial politics. But the British, driven by their desire for territorial control and mineral wealth, were not content with peaceful coexistence. Under the guise of protecting regional stability, they began to push for the annexation of Zulu territory. The Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 erupted from this tension. The British, confident in their superior technology and military might, believed they could easily subdue the Zulu warriors. They didn't realize they were about to face an army that combined traditional tactics with innovative strategy. As the British forces advanced into Zulu territory, they made a crucial mistake. Underestimating their opponent, they split their army, leaving one column exposed at the foot of a mountain called Isandlwana. It was here that the Zulu would demonstrate their military prowess and change the course of the war. The Zulu army, some 20,000 strong, approached Isandlwana using the landscape to conceal their movements. They employed the infamous Horns of the Buffalo formation, a tactic perfected by Shaka decades earlier. This strategy involved a central force engaging the enemy head-on, while two wings swept around to encircle and crush their opponents. On January 22, 1879, the British camp at Isandlwana awoke to a sight that must have chilled them to the bone. The horizon was filled with Zulu warriors, their shields gleaming in the morning sun. The British, numbering around 1,800 men, scrambled to form a defensive line. What followed was a battle that would shock the world. The Zulu warriors, armed primarily with traditional weapons, charged into the teeth of British rifle fire. Their bravery and tactical acumen overwhelmed the British defenses. As the horns of the Zulu formation closed in, the British found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. The The fighting was fierce and close quarters. British soldiers fired volley after volley, but the Zulu warriors kept coming. As ammunition began to run low, panic set in among the British ranks. The Zulu, seizing the moment, pressed their advantage. By the end of the day, the British force at Isandlwana had been almost completely annihilated. The victory at Isandlwana sent shockwaves through the British Empire. It was a humiliating defeat for a nation that prided itself on military superiority. For the Zulu, it was a moment of triumph, a demonstration of their martial skill and the effectiveness of their traditional tactics against a modern army. However, the euphoria of victory was short-lived. The British, stung by the defeat, returned with a vengeance. They poured more troops and resources into the region, determined to crush Zulu resistance once and for all. The war continued, with battles raging across Zulu land. Despite their bravery and initial success, the Zulu kingdom could not withstand the full might of the British Empire indefinitely. The technological gap and sheer numbers of the British forces eventually turned the tide. By the end of 1879, Cetshwayo had been captured, and the Zulu kingdom was divided into 13 chiefdoms, effectively ending its independence. Ethiopia. Victory at Adwa. As European powers carved up Africa in the late 19th century, one ancient kingdom stood firm against the tide of colonialism. Ethiopia, with its rich history stretching back millennia, was about to become the thorn in Italy's imperial ambitions. The stage was set for a clash that would shock the world and change the course of history. Ethiopia's unique position as a long-standing African kingdom with a strong Christian identity set it apart from its neighbors. While much of the continent fell under European rule, Ethiopia maintained its independence, a source of pride for its people and a symbol of resistance for Africans everywhere. But this independence was about to face its greatest threat. Italy, a relative latecomer to the colonial game, set its sights on the Horn of Africa. The Italians saw Ethiopia as a prime target for expansion, believing it would be an easy conquest. They couldn't have been more wrong. The seeds of conflict were sown in the Treaty of Wuchale in 1889. This agreement, signed between Italy and Ethiopia, contained a crucial discrepancy. The Italian version claimed Ethiopia was to conduct all foreign affairs through Italy, essentially making it a protectorate. The Amharic version, however, made this optional. This disagreement would soon escalate into all-out war. Enter Emperor Menelik II, a savvy leader who understood the threat Italy posed. He began preparing Ethiopia for the inevitable conflict, uniting the country's diverse regions under his banner. Menelik was no fool. He knew that to defeat a European power, Ethiopia needed modern weapons. Through clever diplomacy and strategic alliances, he acquired rifles, cannons, and other military hardware from various European nations, including Italy's rivals. As tensions rose, Menelik mobilized a massive multi-ethnic army. This force wasn't just large, it was diverse, bringing together warriors from across Ethiopia's many ethnic groups. The emperor's ability to unite these sometimes rival factions was a testament to his leadership and the gravity of the threat they faced. The Italian forces, led by General Oreste Baratieri, were confident of victory. They had superior technology and training, or so they thought. What they lacked was an understanding of the terrain and the determination of their opponents. On March 1, 1896, the two armies met near the town of Adwa. The Battle of Adwa was a masterclass in strategic warfare. Menelik used the mountainous terrain to his advantage, positioning his troops to ambush the Italians. The Ethiopian army, numbering over 100,000, vastly outnumbered the Italian force of about 20,000. But it wasn't just the numbers that won the day. The Ethiopians launched coordinated attacks from multiple directions, using their knowledge of the landscape to outmaneuver the invaders. Often overlooked in accounts of the battle is the crucial role played by Empress Tetu Betu. She wasn't just a figurehead. Tetu was a skilled technician and diplomat in her own right. She rallied support for the war effort, even leading a contingent of troops herself. The Empress's involvement highlighted the contributions of women to Ethiopia's victory, challenging traditional narratives of warfare. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the scale of Ethiopia's triumph became clear. The Italian army was in tatters, with thousands dead, wounded, or captured. General Baratieri barely escaped with his life. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a powerful statement to the world. An African nation had defeated a European colonial power on a battlefield, preserving its independence and shattering the myth of European invincibility. Benin Kingdom, Art and Tragedy. As Ethiopia celebrated its triumph, a different drama was unfolding on the opposite side of the continent. Imagine a kingdom so rich in art and culture that its treasures would one day be scattered across the world's most prestigious museums. This is the story of Benin, a kingdom that flourished for centuries in what is now southern Nigeria. The Kingdom of Benin emerged around 1200 CE and quickly became one of Africa's most sophisticated states. At its heart was the Oba, a divine king who ruled from his palace in Benin City. The Oba wasn't just a political leader. He was also a spiritual figure, believed to have magical powers. Under his guidance, Benin developed a complex system of government, with various officials and chiefs each playing a specific role in running the kingdom. Benin's economy thrived on trade. The kingdom's merchants dealt in ivory, pepper, and textiles, exchanging these goods with other African kingdoms, and later with European traders. But it wasn't just trade that made Benin famous. The kingdom's artisans, particularly its metalworkers, produced some of the most stunning works of art in African history. The bronze plaques of Benin are perhaps the most famous examples of the kingdom's artistic prowess. These intricate metalworks adorned the walls of the Oba's palace, depicting scenes from Benin's history and mythology. The level of detail in these plaques was astounding, with artisans able to capture everything from the folds in a person's clothing to the texture of an elephant's skin. But the bronzes weren't just beautiful, they were also technologically advanced. The metalworkers of Benin used a sophisticated lost wax casting technique that produced incredibly detailed and durable works of art. When Portuguese traders first arrived in Benin in the late 15th century, they were amazed by what they found. Here was an African kingdom with a level of sophistication that rivaled many European states. The Portuguese established trade relations with Benin, exchanging goods and ideas. For a time, it seemed like Benin and Europe might develop as equal trading partners. But as the centuries passed, the balance of power began to shift. The transatlantic slave trade brought enormous wealth to European nations, while disrupting traditional African societies. Benin initially resisted involvement in the slave trade, but economic pressures eventually forced the kingdom to participate. This decision would have long-lasting consequences for Benin's society and economy. By the late 19th century, European powers were scrambling to colonize Africa. Benin found itself increasingly pressured by the British, who were expanding their control over what would become Nigeria. Tensions between Benin and Britain escalated over trade disputes and Britain's desire to exert more control over the region. In 1897, these tensions came to a head. A British expedition attempted to enter Benin City during a religious festival where foreigners were banned. The group was attacked, and most of its members killed. Britain used this incident as justification for launching a massive punitive expedition against Benin. The British force that invaded Benin in February 1897 was met with fierce resistance. But Benin's traditional weapons were no match for British firearms. After several days of fighting, Benin City fell. What followed was a tragedy that still reverberates today. British soldiers looted the city, setting fire to buildings and seizing thousands of priceless artworks, including the famous bronze plaques. The Ashanti Empire, the Golden Stool Wars. The Ashanti Empire emerged as a powerful force in West Africa during the 18th century. Located in present-day Ghana, this kingdom rose to prominence through its military might and control over the lucrative gold trade. At the heart of Ashanti culture and power was the golden stool, a sacred object that symbolized the unity and sovereignty of the Ashanti people. This wasn't just any piece of royal furniture. It was believed to contain the spirit of the entire nation. The empire's expansion really took off under the leadership of Osei Tutu, who established Kumasi as the political and cultural capital. Picture a bustling city filled with elaborate royal compounds and bustling markets. Kumasi became the beating heart of the Ashanti Empire, a place where trade, diplomacy, and cultural traditions all came together. As the Ashanti grew in power, they started to engage with European powers who were increasingly interested in West Africa. British, Dutch, and others were eager to trade with the Ashanti, exchanging manufactured goods for gold, ivory, and, sadly, enslaved individuals. But this wasn't just a simple trading relationship. It was a complex dance of diplomacy and power politics. Things started to get really tense in the 19th century. The British wanted to dominate the region and expand their influence inland from their coastal settlements. The Ashanti, on the other hand, were determined to maintain their independence and control over their traditional lands. This clash of interests led to a series of conflicts known as the Anglo-Ashanti Wars. These wars were brutal affairs, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Ashanti proved to be formidable opponents, using their knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla tactics to frustrate British advances. But over time, the technological advances of the British, particularly in terms of firearms, began to tell. The tensions between the Ashanti and the British came to a head in 1900 with the War of the Golden Stool. The British governor, Frederick Hodgson, made a crucial mistake. He demanded that the sacred golden stool be handed over to him so he could sit on it. To the Ashanti, this was an unthinkable insult to their culture and sovereignty. The Ashanti people rallied behind their leaders, including the remarkable Queen Nzinga. She inspired her people to resist British demands and fight for their independence. The war that followed was a fierce struggle, with the Ashanti showing incredible determination in the face of superior British firepower. Despite their bravery and tactical skill, the Ashanti were eventually overwhelmed by British forces. The empire was annexed as part of the Gold Coast colony, marking the end of Ashanti independence. But even in defeat, the Ashanti people showed their resilience. They managed to keep the golden stool hidden from the British, preserving this powerful symbol of their culture and identity. The Sokoto Caliphate, a reformist empire. The story begins with Usman Danfodio, a Fulani scholar and religious leader who saw corruption and injustice in the existing Hausa kingdoms. He believed that the rulers had strayed from true Islamic principles and that society needed a major overhaul. Danfodio's vision wasn't just about religious purity. It was a call for social justice and equality that resonated with many people across different ethnic groups. In 1804, Danfodio launched a jihad, or holy war, against the Hausa rulers. But this wasn't just a military campaign. It was a social and religious movement that spread like wildfire across the region. People from all walks of life were drawn to Danfodio's message of reform and his promise of a more just society based on Islamic law. The Sokoto Caliphate expanded rapidly, unifying diverse Hausa states and other regions through a combination of military conquest, diplomacy, and shared religious identity. At its peak, it covered a vast area that included parts of present-day Nigeria, Niger, and Cameroon. The caliphate was organized into a series of emirates, each led by a local ruler who pledged allegiance to the central authority in Sokoto. What made the Sokoto Caliphate unique was its decentralized governance structure. While the Caliph in Sokoto held supreme religious and political authority, the day-to-day administration was left to the emirs. This system allowed for local autonomy while maintaining a sense of unity across the diverse regions of the Caliphate. The economy of the Sokoto Caliphate was built on a foundation of agriculture, with farmers producing crops like millet, sorghum, and cotton. But it wasn't just about farming. The Caliphate was also plugged into regional trade networks, exchanging goods with neighboring states and even distant partners. This economic activity helped fuel the growth and expansion of the Caliphate. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Sokoto Caliphate was the role of women, particularly in education and scholarship. Nana Asma'u, the daughter of Usman Danfodio, emerged as a prominent figure in this regard. She was a scholar, poet, and advocate for women's rights who established a network of women teachers known as the Yantaru. These women traveled from village to village, educating rural women and spreading the teachings of Islam. But the Sokoto Caliphate faced its share of challenges. There were internal conflicts as different factions vied for power. Non-Muslim communities within the Caliphate's borders often resisted its rule and Islamic laws. And as the 19th century wore on, a new threat appeared on the horizon. European colonial powers with their eyes on West Africa. The British Empire, in particular, was expanding its influence in the region. At first, there were diplomatic exchanges and trade agreements. But as time went on, the British became more aggressive in their push for control. The Sokoto Caliphate found itself caught in the crosshairs of colonial ambition. The final blow came in 1903. After a series of military campaigns, British forces captured Sokoto, the capital of the Caliphate. The last caliph, Muhammadu Atahiro I, was forced to flee. He made a last stand against the British, but was defeated and killed in battle. With that, the Sokoto Caliphate as an independent state came to an end. Africa's interconnected legacies. As we look back on the rich tapestry of African history, we see a continent deeply interconnected through trade, culture, and innovation. For thousands of years, African civilizations exchanged ideas, goods, and technologies that shaped the continent and the world beyond. The spread of ironworking across regions revolutionized agriculture and warfare, while new agricultural practices allowed diverse crops to flourish in different climates. These advancements didn't stay confined within Africa's borders. They flowed outward through extensive trade networks that spanned the globe. Africa's role in world history was pivotal, as it formed crucial links in trans-Saharan, Indian Ocean, and transatlantic trade routes, connecting the continent to Europe, Asia, and the Americas. These networks weren't just about exchanging goods, they were conduits for culture and knowledge. African societies blended their indigenous traditions with influences from Islam, Christianity, and other external sources, creating vibrant new cultural expressions that continue to evolve today. The resilience of African civilizations in the face of immense challenges is a testament to their strength and adaptability. Internal conflicts, environmental pressures, and the disruptive forces of colonialism and the slave trade posed significant threats. Yet African societies persevered, and their legacies endure. This is evident in the enduring influence of ancient kingdoms and empires, whose systems of governance, architectural marvels, and artistic traditions continue to inspire modern African identity. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more history documentaries, and tell us in the comments which part of the documentary was most interesting to you. Thank you for watching and being a part of our journey through history, and we'll see you in the next documentary.